I just wanted to say that you are someone who does not require introductions. However, I will tell that you are a writer, philosopher, winner of Shevchenko Award, and many other awards. Let's not waste our time for that. Our today's panel discussion. Actually, the conversation and that panel discussion is dedicated to Ukrainian identity as key to Ukrainian national security. And I have a question about the national identity or citizens' identity of a Ukrainian. What is it? And is it really a key to national security, to victory? First of all, I must say that as soon as I got the topic from the organizers, I got problems with it because there is a repetition here, national identity as a key to national security. If the identity doesn't exist, there cannot be any security because you just don't exist. And what does it matter? Who will come? Who will govern you? There is such a mindset of indifference. There is such a possible worldview. We know these people, this type of people. We traditionally use this term of a Soviet person to describe such people. And this Soviet person is there even 30 years after the breakup of the Soviet Empire. And I'm talking as someone who just after the train trip and after the 3-week European tour came back to Ukraine. So 5 books have been published in 3 countries that I had to present. And that was the reason of my trip. And the geography was quite interesting. Riga, Warsaw, Belgrade, Warsaw again. And in this geography, this post-Soviet man, even though it's not a social Soviet Union territory, but 35 years ago, this unclear identity and the respective mindset of a person who is always on the side of the strongest one. So this identity, we are someone, so we belong to someone, we are under someone, we are under the today's star, is a quite international phenomenon. And it's something very useful for all dictatorship. People are waiting for a strong hand that will protect all of them. It's a Russian slavery psychology, and maybe not only a Russian one, because there is this syndrome that can be found anywhere, but we are not interested in that, right? We are interested in who we are. So if this identity, who do we belong to, exists, actually Alexander Zinchenko in the beginning of March 2022 asked this question in a village close to Kyiv when the invaders, intruders came to the village. And that phrase made them excuse themselves and leave. From the anthropological point of view, it's very interesting. I was talking to him, asking what made you ask this question, and he said, I do not know. So he was a Russian-speaking person, but at some point he showed this facet of him. So he became strong. Yes, he took this position. He announced himself someone high in the hierarchy, and he asked, "Who did you come to? From who did you come to?" And he just made them flee. And I can give a lot of such examples. For example, I was absolutely impressed with the reels. I'm just like J.D. Vance, who said to Zelensky that he knew Ukraine because he was watching the stories. So yeah, that's also interesting anthropologically. I watch the stories. Me too. I like watching reels from time to time, and just last year, it was quite funny to see a short film by a resident of Kursk region in Sucha, if I'm not mistaken, when our soldiers were there. He was obviously bewildered and frustrated because he was following someone else coming on tanks. Ukrainian flag appearing there, and he was saying the officer said it was forbidden to record videos, and I approached him to ask what should we do, and he responded to learn Ukrainian language and get ready to a referendum. And he was saying that with understanding that it was an irony and sarcasm, but at the same time, you know, he was already acting as this submissive little dog. And for us, it's something unacceptable seeing tanks, foreign tanks, on the streets of our cities. And he was looking for an answer. And that's something very characteristic of them. Looking for a senior one, and these are people without identity. So security as such is not possible there because they were looking for the security from someone and they were taking the side of someone promising the security. So if identity equals security, how should we treat the fact that Ukrainians are very suspicious of the state as such? Just on Tuesday, there was a meeting of the Interagency Committee on Identity, National Identity, and I was shocked to find out that Ukrainians and Russians find themselves in opposition to the Russians. Ukrainians find themselves in opposition to Russians and the state at the same time. Where does it come from? Well, it's clear. It's very obvious where it comes from, and it's very natural. A nation which for centuries, let's just look into our history. Our history is our resume, is our CV, which describes individual cases and different turns of communities. There are all explanations, there are all transgeneration traumas, what can be the causes of them, and the lessons drew from them. I was taught as a child that the power is with them, the country is with us. But now the power is with us. No, sorry, it's been 300 years that we were getting used to find a relative who would resolve all the issues. And you want that to change just overnight? No, it cannot happen like that. Secondly, Ukrainian state gives a lot of reasons for distrust and this natural, organic distrust of the nation towards the state because the nation had to preserve itself under different governments. And let me quote Dragomanov, one of the most interesting thinkers of 19th centuries, which is not quite honored yet. So he was saying that the nation was trying to address fatal national problems under foreign governments. And it is true. Show me a country which, after so many imperial governments kept living and finally found itself in the end of 20th century within the borders that we fought for and we keep fighting for. So almost ethnic borders with the biggest territory in Europe, with preserved treasures and richness. Obviously, the Moscow couldn't let us go so easily, but the fact that Ukrainian state preserved itself. Excuse me, I'm just too tired. It's all right. I'm just correcting you. Yeah, all these governments were temporary. Ukrainian state was living in that mode. So when did we get Ukrainian passports? They were, for some reason, in two languages. For 5 years, we were holding Soviet passports, and we were expecting Ukrainian state to come back. And meanwhile, it's been 11 years of Russian-Ukrainian war, and Europe now understands that all the arrangements between Gorbachev and Western leaders and the US primarily led to this temporary nature, and we are gradually moving to the topic of identity and security, and we can use very specific examples. One of the conditions of Russian military leaving Germany and the fall of Berlin Wall, which is celebrated up until today. So the condition of this, big celebration of democracy was leaving all the memories of Russian presence in Eastern Germany and Eastern Berlin. That's why there is still a Moscow cafe in the center of the city there, which is not renamed because they say it's their history. These speakers say so because they got payments from Kremlin, and it's something which is well known today. If you follow the scandals and if you follow the appearances, all of it is part of one big war, so to say. The war that Kremlin keeps waging against the West. And when Yeltsin told Clinton, leave Europe for us, he was saying that not because he won in a state of alcohol intoxication, but because he was candid. We have Mr. Minister of Sports and Youth and Mr. Kvit, representative of Educational Environment. By the way, my congratulations with the anniversary of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy University, which celebrates 410 years. it is the oldest Ukrainian university, and it's part of our identity. Yes, it's a big part of it. So, what is the role of each sector, each area in strengthening Ukrainian identity? Or maybe the state should not affect the identity in any way. But why would we need it? Just to collect taxes? The state is us, first of all. So this Soviet demarcation between us and them, the power and us, the power and the society, like the authorities exist separately and the society exists separately, and there is this mutual distrust. That's something post-colonial. It's still something post-colonial, and there is this mix here, post-colonial and military, because of course increasing distrust towards the state happens through information space, and now it also happens due to the drafting process. It happens with the military, but let's not go into that. Let's maybe not touch this topic. I wrote a whole novel on the topic of Ukraine losing information war without understanding that the wars this war waged against Ukraine. So Ms. Tatiana is responsible for information policy. It's too late. It's too late to be responsible for information policy. We are just talking about the changes that happened in the 19th, 20th century. If you quote a journalist, you don't know anymore for whom you are working. So you no longer know who you are working for and whose hands show the direction for media outlet or TV channel. The Polish, for example, just the day before yesterday, as I was talking to Polish intellectuals, I heard a phrase which made me feel relieved because they were saying that they are close to this fire, to this center of issues, and they were saying that the nations would at some point have to answer the questions Ukrainian are now called to answer. So our experience is very precious for the humanity without any unnecessary ambitions, of course. So from the Polish intellectuals, I heard something I kept saying for a long time. They said they lost internet. This Polish sector of internet with addresses ending in PL were governed by Russia. And when you see on the internet anti-Ukrainian bots cursing Ukraine, etc., farmers, that's something very clear. That was something Russia paid for. But as you get connected to Polish websites and as you see so much hatred towards Ukrainian, it doesn't reflect the real state of Polish society. It's something Russia works with, Russian authorities and administration work with. So it's very hard to win a war when the information space is controlled by the enemy, but we will. And it's an unprecedented situation. What can the state do? everything it wasn't doing for the last 34 years. Yes, 35 years will be celebrated next year. So the state should understand that the culture is at least soft power. And I actually already wrote about that, and it's easier for me to refer everyone to something I've already written in my last book, Our Europe. There is an essay dedicated to my discussion with the essay by Milan Kundera. It's a classic essay which gave a start to the concept of Central Europe, saying that we are Eastern Europe together with Russia. Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia are Eastern Europe. So he was saying, and the Warsaw Bloc was the true Europe, a Catholic one belonging to Rome, and it was the continuation of Roman tradition. By the way, he didn't mention Magdeburg law at all. And I was saying that Europe is described by Rome, Paris, Canals, and Magdeburg, rule of law, rights of people and citizens. Canals symbolizes division between spiritual and civil authority. So, as a contrast to the Orthodox Church being a department of Kremlin, and the fourth Magdeburg law being a symbol of local self-government. So, the border of Europe, the eastern border of Europe, as a civilization, is somewhere between Hluchovo and Poltava. And if we look at our cities defending themselves, let's take Nizhyn or Hostomel during Russian attacks in spring 2022, we would see great self-organization. The farmers were bringing milk to the sieged Nizhyn, but they're finding ways, and the city, even despite the siege, kept living. And it was sort of reanimation of pre-modern, anti-modern modalities of urban living. And if you look at that, you would see that each of these cities got Magdeburg right at some point. So that's something we have, but we are not always conscious of. And you know that the sentences by Zabushko is something never-ending, with constant brackets and commas. But I remember what we are talking about. I remember what we started with. I remember your question. So, the task of public policy in the area of culture, education, and information is to bring back all the underlying signs of our identity. So communication, it's something bigger than communication. It's everything: education, culture, information. So Yes, managing funds and nourishing the things that help us as a community survive and secure ourselves in front of possible internal and external threats, and finally blossom fully to the extent possible, because this is a goal every community has to develop and have a say in the harmony of the world spirit. As I had said, you called me a philosopher in the beginning, and it's true that I hold a PhD that I got in the past life, but this background in philosophy makes you love long stories and long history. It's very fascinating to follow these long trends. It sounds like a curse. I wish you to live in interesting times, but what should we do with that? And what is, in your opinion, the main text that we have to look into as we try to answer the question, what is Ukrainian identity? Is there such a text? Well, there is a whole list of such texts, of such works, and I keep referring everyone to these texts in my novels, in my essays. You're talking in a business manner. Yes, of course, very briefly. Like in a brochure, I tried to get a book about our war, and there is an Italian publishing house that requested a book from me. So they were asking to explain what they missed, the Italians, in terms of historic and cultural context of this war, and they wanted it to be described in 120,000 signs. That's how I wrote The Longest Journey, because I had to explain if they were asking me to do that. So I had to describe it in 120,000 signs.
So what do you have to read? It's just a mandatory read, I would say. What is the mandatory read for anyone who's believing themselves Ukrainian should read if they want to understand the essential part of Ukrainian identity? Well, maybe Shevelyov, you got to start with, like Shevelyov's essays. He's been translated. His compilations have been translated, and there have been. He had written a number of very concise essays. When some Ukrainian business community was asking him in the West, what does it mean to be Ukrainian? So Moscow Maroseyka, it's a small article that he wrote in 1954 to the anniversary of Pereyaslavsk Council. That's one of the programmatic texts that I think everybody should learn in school. But any educated person to understand where we are in these hierarchy established by Moscow initially, we are below, they are above, that initially it was the other way around. And from then on, you can understand where we are now and what are we fighting for. I will ask the organizers to 5 extended minutes. I'll just have 2 more questions, and I hope the audience will not protest. So coming back to the text of Shevelyov and this explanation of where Moscow installed us or tried to install us, I have this question about the legendary inferiority complex that Ukrainians have been assumed to have. Is it a phenomenon? Is it a colonial construct? Is it still alive? And if so, are there chances to deal with it? It's there, but there's also good news. we, in a large way, so, 5 minutes is not enough for this answer. It's my favorite size and color, as some famous cartoon character used to say. And since you've been asking me about literature, some reading advice, so I have a separate essay which is published as a book, basically about this particular question, the reasons and the causes that Emsky decree, which has cost us so much. In the school, we used to learn that it was about ban of Ukrainian language. It was much more profound and serious. It was about the ban to modernize based on ethnic identity. So, an ethnic identity that was artificially prevented from modernizing. So the guy who's Arestovich, that's what it means, the full synchronicity with the audience. When he's saying that Ukrainian culture is rural mostly, that's where it basically stems from 150 years of Emsky decree. So 5 years ago, I wrote and published a small book, even less than 120,000 symbols, how they hacked at the cherry garden, cherry orchard, or a long road from Bad Ems. Bad Ems is a fatal Prussian town where Franco-Prussian War was born, and where there was an attempt to bury us, and we still refuse to do that for 200 years. So the cherry orchard is a reference to Chekhov. It's an answer to the question why Chekhov was a Ukrainian speaking from childhood, could not become a Ukrainian writer, although Zankovetska was asking him to write a play in Ukrainian for her. So there was a number of things, and everybody's talking about it as if we have lived with this inferiority complex as a colonial construct. Of course, it's a colonial construct. Naturally, it is a colonial construct. So I'm just showing with this reference how this construct was built, and that it wasn't built through one generation, and even now it's several centuries. And so with the absence of our own autonomous resource that you were asking me about, right? So information, education, and culture, what Ukrainian state did, it didn't do much, didn't do nothing. All these 30 years, it wasn't doing anything, it was waiting. It was waiting what white flag will be given from the West, how the Venice Commission will tell us we should protect the Russian language in Ukraine, and how to tame suicidal nationalism, to quote the Kiev Chicken speech that didn't go anywhere from the Western discourse in the community of decision makers. And so this particular construct that was retained and is retained based on logic. So only during the big war it started to get hit, when Ukrainians went to the West as refugees, and educated Ukrainians started traveling, and almost instantly, 6 million people went out. I thought it was the visa cancellation would do that, but even the visa, with all the tourism and the coffee and in Western capitals, still it didn't happen before the war. Because all Ukrainians in Europe, they took the Russian ancestors. And the Russian ancestors continued to propagate Russian propaganda that Russian Tsars were actually ruling here and that Russians were everywhere here. So that's how physically, by traveling to the West, Ukrainian middle class, the one that should become the identity-bearing backbone, it stayed within the sphere of influence of Russian world. The things that we were pumped full for 15 years before the war. So only during the war, when 6 million people went abroad to live with the medical insurance, etc., with schools for children, with kindergarten, with the need to rent an apartment, and actually delved deep into the West that they were dreaming about for years, having their inferiority complex. And you know, I love to talk with the taxi drivers. It's a source of information. These are ontological studies. In some 2020, when everywhere is better than us, there's nowhere a worse place than here. And I ask him, where have you been to compare? He kind of lost the thought, but he was full of conviction. It's a conviction of a person that defends their mindset. And he was saying to me, who traveled about a quarter of the world, like 50 countries, he's telling me, this is the worst place in the world. And the 6 million people who went abroad suddenly saw that it's far from truth. And we have a lot of things to learn, but the world has a lot of things to learn from us. And if there would be a difference in legal culture, yes, that's when there are general rules, how to stick to these general rules. But we don't have time to discuss that. But one way or another, this has helped a lot. Because, you know, a writer is always eavesdropping what people say, how people say, everywhere we are, and keeping notes, because you're working with language. And I see how discourse has changed. Like those people who politicians usually call simple people, although you never know who's simpler. Most of our politicians, they are really two-bit people talking about simplicity. But I just loathe this term, like simple folks. It's also something from Soviet culture, like Soviet, and there's simple and there's complex. So the working Ukrainians that are coming back from Europe, if before we had some trouble at the border, oh, well, of course, that's Ukraine. What do you expect? What do you expect from them? Of course, that's the way it is. So this is where denigration turns on. But now it's not there. So there is a chance to fight through this. Yeah, we're learning fast, and it's a good news. So we're in the business forum. The role of moderator is a difficult role. So the question about Chekolenko. Do you see any modern Chekolenko? So there are a lot of business people. It's not a short answer.
Коротко не буду. Я взагалі, значить, я взагалі мріяла, щоб хлопці Толстого.
You know, I was suggesting for a long time to rename the Tolstoy Square in Kiev to Chekolenko Square.
Заспокоїлася, коли це
But then,
площа.
at least it was renamed.
Хто так називає взагалі центральні площі. Але коли студенти
But
почали...
when students started saying, like, let's meet up at the Plug, so they finally came up with a proper name. But Chekolenko,
Не тільки Чекаленко, тут я знову звертаюся до того, що
not only Chekolenko, I'm coming back to what I wrote about in this thick book that I called Notre Dame d'Ukraine. The entire modern Ukraine has been created by Ukrainian businesses, and you can't read anything about it in Ukrainian business books. Let's write such a business book, training book. Yeah, it's not only Chekolenko. I'm also writing about Kosach and Staritsky, about people, and there were a lot of those people, basically, people who invested in Ukraine. And it used to be called investing in the Ukrainian cause. They invested all their properties and fortunes into Ukrainian cause. We don't remember now how Lysenko's community, how the community fundraised the money for Lysenko to build a house, and he used that money to found a music school. That was the ethics of that community. Chekolenko was not the only one with this kind of ethics. So that was the norm. Yeah, it was a norm. And without that norm, we would have been where Belarusians are, even below. So that was the...
Тобто, що ми виграли, це тільки ще півтори хвилини.
So like a minute and a half more. What have we won out of the Moroseika decree? What the Poles didn't allow to do. So we won this
Тобто, людей
layer of Malorossian
козацького походження
nobility.
із козацької
The nobility that stemmed from Cossacks, and they were successfully incorporated into Russian imperial structures, who remembered, or having remembered in the 19th century, under Taras Shevchenko's influence, it's his address to those who live, those who lived, and those who will live. So that was a manifest of national unity of the Malorossian nobility with the mass of Ukrainians. So it's a serious revolutionary analogy of the French Revolution in the Ukrainian ground, and the Poles still don't have that. They have this clash between elite and the Janos. But that's a political discourse. We can skip that. So in reality, this particular layer of society that basically signed up to the project of modern Ukraine in spite of Emsky decree that could allow or could afford, as General Dragomirov, who was depicted in the famous picture Zaporozhye Cossacks writing a letter to Turkish Sultan, who was promoting the Ukrainian cause here in Kiev, and he was saying it's their government but our country. Did we decommunize him? Anytime there's no longer the street of General Dragomirov on Kiev map, and that's wrong, because Dragomirov was also the sponsor or a quiet saboteur against the Tsarist structure. He was Tsar's general working against Ukrainian government. But if Ukrainians were not well incorporated in the Tsarist government working for the cause of Ukraine, these quiet saboteurs, then it wouldn't come to Ukraine either in 1918, 1991. We have a great deal of gratitude to those. Oksana Zabuzko, round of applause.